Hello and welcome, my name's Ryan, I'm also known as RM2K Dev. Welcome back to the Unity 5 RPG tutorial. In this video, we're going to get our hero, our main player, up and running. So, let's begin. The first thing you're going to need is a sprite set or a character set. I'm just using this one here. I think this was from OpenGamer, I'm not 100% sure, but I will try and find it and leave a link in the description. So I'm going to drag that into my Unity project. Now I've created a folder under assets called characters, and I'm just going to drag this character set into that folder. Now in Unity, if you click on the character set, you'll open up the properties in the inspector window, and you'll see that its sprite mode is set to single. We need to change this to multiple because we have multiple sprites within one image, and then select sprite editor. This will allow us to split these images up how we want. In the sprite editor, select the slice button, change it from type grid, yours will be set to type automatic, change it from automatic to grid. Now the pixel size is going to be 32 by 32. Oh, sorry, not 32 by 32. The offset, just leave the rest of these at 0, and pivot in center and click slice. What will happen is you'll see we have all these individually sliced out characters now. Once you've sliced your character set appropriately, just select apply, and you can close the sprite editor. Now if you take a look down in the asset window, you'll see that the sprite that once was a single sprite has now been sliced up into multiple little sprites. We'll be using these for our character. The next thing to do is just make sure you're back on this parent character set again, the parent object, or whatever that is, the main container, and change the filter mode from bilinear to point. Basically, this turns off the scaling algorithm that Unity uses. Now we need to create some animations. So the first thing I'm going to do is right click on the word assets and select create folder. Make sure you click apply after you've done anything. So I'll just explain what happened then. I made changes in the inspector, but I didn't press this apply button down here. So make sure you select that apply button, then go and create a new folder and name that folder animations, or anim if you want. I'm just going to clean up my project. There we go. So now I've got a folder for the animations. What I'm going to do now is go back into my characters. I'm going to expand this character set up, and then I'm going to find the frames that I want to use for my animation. So I want to use character set 0, 1, and 2 as my down animation. So select those three sprites and drag them into your scene view. It's going to ask you to create an animation. Navigate to the animations folder we just created and name this walk_down. Save that. Then we need to find the next animation, which is for me going to be 12, 13, and 14 for left. So select those three, drag those into your scene view and navigate back to the animations folder, and I'm going to call this walk left. Now we need to find the next animation, which is going to be, for me, if I continue down, it's going to be right, and that starts 24, 25, and 26. So select those three sprites, drag them into your scene view, once again, animations, and call this one walk_right. Finally, we need to find the next animation, which is going to be walking up, which for me is frame 36, 37, 38. So select those three frames and drag that into your scene view as well. Navigate to the animations folder and call this walk up. Now we have the four animations we'll be using for our player, which are the walking animations. We need to do the same thing to create the idle animations, but we're going to do that slightly differently. So select those four objects that are now in your scene and delete them because we don't actually need those. Then in your character set, just navigate to any one of the frames, doesn't matter which one. I'm going to use character set 1 because that is facing down and it's also in its non-animated state. And I'm going to drag that onto my scene view and I'm going to rename that as player. And that's going to be the object that we use to hold our actual player object. Now the next thing you'll notice is we can't actually see the player on the screen. This is because of the ordering in which these are being rendered. So if we have a look at our demo map, we wanted the player to be below the base of the tree and below the tops of the trees as well. So what we need to do is change that from, so we go into our player, open the sprite renderer and you'll see order in layer is 0. If you have a look at the tree tops layer, you'll see that it also has an order in layer and it's set to 5. So if we set our player's order in layer to 5, our player should be above everything and below the tree tops. Let me just make sure that that works. No, we're above everything still, so I think that needs to be 4. Set the order and layer to 4, and we should be below the tree tops, but above everything else like the rocks and things like that. So we're above the base of the tree and below the tree tops. So you see that that makes a nice smooth transition there when you're walking around the tree. And we're also above the map. The next thing we need to do is create a animation. Oh, sorry, we've got these animations in our animation folder. You'll see that we also have 4 animation controllers. You can delete these because we won't be using them. So you just need those animations that we created earlier. Select your player object and then drag one of these animations onto the inspector. This will create the animation controller for the player. It's been created, it's called player. And it will also assign a default animation to it. The first thing I want to do is just rename this from player to player AC, just to be clear about what it is. So I'm just going to rename that from player to player AC. That stands for animation controller. Double click on the animation controller and it's going to have created you a very basic state machine. Entry point, exit point, any state, and then the default or the default transition to the default state. So I'm going to delete the default state because we don't need this one, and I'm going to create a new state, and I'm going to say from new blend tree. This will become the default blend tree. I'm going to name this idle. There we go. Double click on idle. It's going to open this new window up for you. This is going to be the blend tree for the player. Now, a blend tree is basically a way of taking parameters and blending between them with different actions. A little bit more about how this works once we get a little bit further into it. The next thing I'm going to do is create actually, what am I going to... Actually, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll create the idle animations first. So what you want to do is right-click on all of these, right-click on them and select Show in Explorer. This will open up the folder where they've been created. Just highlight them all, copy and paste. That will create a copy of all of these. And then go back to Unity, you'll see those copies in here. So we've got walk down copy. Rename that to idle down copy. Sorry, not copy, just idle down. And do the same for walk left copy. That becomes idle underscore left. Same for walk right. That becomes idle underscore right. And walk up becomes idle underscore up. So now we have 4 idle states and 4 walk states. Now, if you remember, these animations contain the 3 frames of animation. So we need to make sure that these idle frames only contain the idle animation state. Now, to do that, we need to select all of these frames and drag them onto the state machine. Then select all of the walking frames and drag those onto the state machine as well. Now, what this has done is this has basically allowed us to edit these animations from within the player object's animator, if that makes sense. So select the player object, then go to Window, select Animation, and you'll see this new window comes up here. Now, by adding those animations into the state machine, Mecanum's state machine, you'll see we have access to edit those animations here. Now, if you select the idle ones, because we copy pasted those in Windows Explorer, they don't actually have any frames or properties associated to them. However, the walking ones, which we created within Unity, do. And those states are going to be the 3 frames of animation. So select walk up, select the first frame, make sure that these 2 dots are blue, press Ctrl C or Command C if you're on a Mac to copy those, go to the idle up state and paste that onto the idle up. Now the 3 frames will be copied over. You can delete the first frame and the last frame and then drag the middle frame over to the left. So the middle frame becomes the first frame. Do the same for right. So we just select the first frame, copy, go to idle right, paste, delete the first and the third frames and drag the second frame to the first frame. Do the same for left. You simply copy the first frame, go to idle left, paste, delete the first frame, delete the third frame and drag the second frame back to the first frame. And finally for walk down, copy the first frame, go back to idle down, paste, delete the first frame, delete the third frame and drag the the second frame over to the left to become the first frame. So now what we've got are up animations, down animations, left and right animations, and we also have the idle animations as well. Completely optional step, but I'm going to do this. Select walk up, copy the second frame and paste it into the 4th position. So we go left foot, no foot, right foot, no foot. That makes the animation smoother. I'm going to do the same for the right animation. Simply paste that there. The left animation, copy the second frame, paste it where the 4th frame would be. And for the down animation, copy the second frame, paste it where the 4th frame would be. Now we've set up our animations for the player, you can close the animation window and delete all of these entries from the state machine because we no longer need them to be accessible from within the player. Hopefully that all made sense. The next thing we're going to do is double click, actually no, the next thing we'll do is select parameters from within your Animator, click the plus icon, create a new float. I'm going to call this input_x. I'm going to add another one, another float, input_y. And I'm going to add a boolean, and I'm going to call this is walking. These will serve as the inputs and the flags to decide whether or not we're transitioning from one state to another. So double click on the idle state, you go into the blend tree that we created earlier. Change the blend type in the inspector from 1D to two-dimensional freeform Cartesian. So 2D freeform Cartesian, change it to that. Now the parameters are going to be input X and input Y. They'll be our two parameters. Just make sure I got that right. Yeah, that's correct. Now click this little plus icon under motion 4 times and click add motion field. So 1, 2 motion fields, 3 motion fields, and finally a 4th motion field. Now we can assign these as idle. These are going to be our idle states. So I'm going to say up, down. So the first one will be up, the second one will be down, the third one will be left, and the 4th one will be right. These are our four states of animation. Now for these states to be activated, we need to set the positions. These are going to be our input positions to the appropriate values. So in order for the player to be going up, Y needs to be 1 and X needs to be 0. In order for the player to be going down, Y needs to be -1 and X needs to be 0. In order for the player to be moving left, X needs to be -1 and Y needs to be 0. And in order for the player to be moving right, X needs to be +1, so 1, and position Y is 0. Now if you have a look at the above this, you'll see what we've created is somewhat like a gamepad, you know, up, down, left, and right, where the middle point is the blend state between X and Y. And as I move this around, you'll be able to see the sliders on the blend tree are matching that. So if I put this in the center, they're both 0, 0. As I move to the left, the input X goes to the left. As I move to the right, input X goes to the right, so 1. And then same for up and down. Up becomes 1, down becomes -1. So that's how we use these blend states. And also, if you have a look in the little Mecanum preview window down here, when the player is facing, I may have got those around. Oh no, that's right. So facing up, facing down, facing left, facing right. So this works somewhat like a gamepad. Now, hopefully this is all making sense. The next thing we need to do is simply duplicate this. Copy the idle state, paste that into your state machine for your player, and rename this to walking. Double click on walking and we can simply replace the animations in the blend tree because the settings are all correct with the walking animations. So replace up with walking up, replace idle down with walk down, replace idle left with walk left, and finally replace idle right with walk right. Go back to your base layer by selecting base layer in the top left of the animator. And we need to create a transition from idle to walking. Simply right click on idle, select make transition. You'll get this little transition line, then click on walking. Then do the same thing in reverse, right click on walking, create the transition from walking back to the idle state. Now click on the transition that goes from idle to walking. There's a little arrow pointing in that direction. And unselect this box that says has exit time. What this basically means is that when we transition from an idle state to a walking state, there's no time delay between when that happens. It happens as you push the button as the flag is set. Now the condition for this state to be true, select the add button, the little plus here under conditions, change that from input X to is walking and leave it set as true. So the condition that we move from the idle state to the walking state is that the is walking flag is set to true. The same applies in reverse. Simply select the reverse transition, unselect the has exit time, and add a condition that says is walking is false. So if the player is not walking, we shouldn't be animated. We should jump back into the idle state, if that makes sense. I hope this is all making sense. That will do it for our animation controller and all of our animation states and our animations. We can now come to creating the script for our player. Simply click on your player, select add component, new script, and I'm going to call this player movement. It's going to be a C# script. I'm just going to select create and add. it will ask me, I think that'll put it in the default folder. I'm just going to drag that to my scripts folder. And then I'm going to open that in MonoDevelop, simply by double clicking on it. MonoDevelop has stopped working and we have bugs. So I'm going to pause the video here and I'll open that up in 2 seconds. Okay, so the player movement script is fairly straightforward. All we need to do is get our animator, get our rigid body, take the input from the player, send the inputs to the animation controller, and then update our position on the map. The animation controller will handle all of our positioning, our direction, our animation states, pretty much everything to do with our animation will be handled by that animation controller simply by supplying it the input X, the input Y, and a flag that tells us if we're walking or not. I'm going to start by creating a private variable. It's going to be of type Rigidbody2D, and it's just going to say RBody. I'm also going to create another one called Animator, and it's going to be called Anim. And then in our start event, I'm just going to say RBody equals getComponent. It's going to be of type Rigidbody2D. Then I'm also going to say Anim equals getComponent. It's going to be type Animator. Sorry, Animator with a capital A. Animation, Animator. There we go. That gives us access to the 2 components that were added to our player in previous videos and this video. That was the rigid body, which we haven't added yet, and the animator, which we have added. So jump back to our script. We're going to go to our update method. In our update method, I'm simply going to say, I'm going to create a new vector2. I'm going to call this a movement vector. So movement underscore vector. It's going to be equal to a new vector2. So we're going to create a new one from scratch. The X and Y positions that we're going to supply to this are going to be the horizontal and vertical axis from our input controller, which is part of Unity. Simply type input.getAxis raw, and we're going to say horizontal. There we go. And for the Y parameter, it's input.getAxis raw, and we're going to say vertical. There we go. So that's our movement vector. Now the reason we're using getAxis raw and not getAxis is because getAxis raw simply returns us true or false. If we press the left key, horizontal will become -1. If we release the left key, horizontal will become 0. If we were using getAxis, this would allow us a floating point precision freedom. Basically, as you press the left button down, it will move from 0 to -1. So it would be like 0, -0.9, -0.98, all the way down until -1, something like that. If you push the right key, it would be 0, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, 0.5, and it animates towards 1. It animates towards the number you're trying to get to. Whereas using getAxis raw is truly on or off. It's button is pressed, button is not pressed. 0, -1, 0, 1 for horizontal and vertical. So that's why we're doing it like that. The next thing we need to do is say to our animator, are we moving? That's our isWalking flag. So if we can say if, and I'm just going to say if the movement vector is not equal to vector2.0. So this is vector2.0 is basically, it's just a vector2 where both X and Y are set at 0. So it'll be X0, Y0. If our movement vector is not 0, we must be moving because the only parameters that we supplied to it were the inputs. And if our movement vector is not 0, we must be moving. So we can say to our animator by using anim.setBool, because it was a bool value, a boolean value. The key is walking, and the value is going to be true because we are walking. That was the condition of this if statement. We can add an else clause to this if statement that says anim.setBool is walking false. There we go. Oops. Is walking false. So if we are walking, we set the is walking property to true. If we're not walking, we set it to false. Now let's have a look at our animator and see what happens. Based on our transition logic that we set up here, if we are walking, we transition from the idle animator to the walking animator. If that condition changes from true to false, we transition from the walking animator to the idle animator. Now, the second last thing we need to do is actually apply the movement to our character. We can do this with the rigid body. Say rbody.movePosition. We're going to move at the current position, so rbody.position, plus the movement vector. so movement vector, and we're going to multiply that by time.delta time. This basically means that instead of moving in meters per frame, so for instance, if this was 1 on horizontal, that would be 1 meter per frame. Multiplying this by time.delta time means that we're moving 1 meter per, we're moving over 1 meter per 60 frames per time between each frame. So basically you multiply it by time.delta time. So we're going from where we currently are to where we currently are plus the movement vector. So if horizontal was 1, our x-axis would increase by 1. If horizontal was -1, our x-axis would decrease by 1, so -1. The next thing we need to do is supply those movement vectors to the animator. We can do that simply by saying anim.setFloat. I'm going to set the float variable, which was input_x, and we're going to set that to movement vector.x. We'll do the same for y, simply copy paste that, movement vector.y. Now I've jumped around back and forth a little bit in this script. That was just because I wanted to explain things sequentially, but take note of the order in which that I've written this code. The reason we set these variables, these floats, within our isWalking clause of our if statement is because when we release the keys and isWalking is false, we still want to be facing the direction that we were walking. We don't want it to snap back to 0. We don't want our input x and input y to change. We want them to stay at what they were. So we only update those variables if we are walking. If we're not walking, we don't change them. That way, if we pushed left and released left, input x would stay at -1 because it wouldn't get updated to 0. With all of that set, the last thing we need to do is save our script. I just pressed Control S or Command S if you're on a Mac. Go to your player object and we need to add the rigid body. So go to Physics 2D, or sorry, select Add Component, Physics 2D, and then Rigid Body 2D. The one thing I'm going to say here is fixed angle and gravity scale is 0. That's our the two changes that we need to make. And hopefully, if everything went well, we can run our project and we should have animated inputs. If I select right, you'll see the character moves to the right. If I select left, we move to the left. Up, we move up. Down, we move down. And you can see that as soon as I release those buttons, the animation stops. There is a little bit of a delay there. Let's have a look at what's happening. I see what's happening there. So in the actual in the transition, you see this settings area here. This section here is the time that it takes to transition from a walking animation to an idle animation. So we turned has exit time off, which means there's no time between. It doesn't wait for the frame to stop, but we need to also shorten this down to almost nothing. We'll do the same thing for the transition to walking. Shorten those two settings. Whoops. Oh, that's strange. It actually just disappeared. Anyway, just shorten those two. There we go. Shorten those two variables, and what will happen now is when you push the key and release the key, the transition between walking and not walking happens immediately. And you can see we can also walk in multiple directions. Holding directional keys, the character will face down. You could adjust the priorities of these based on the order that you have things set within the animator, the animation controller. But that's basically how we do mechanism-based movement for our players. The good thing about doing it this way is that it's very easy to add extra states. For example, if you wanted to have an attacking state, you could simply create a new state, attacking, assign all of your animations to the attacking blend tree, and then make transitions from walking to attacking, and also from idle to attacking. That way your player will be able to attack when it's walking or when it's idle. This is really good because it basically decouples all of the logic of animating your character from your code to your game. You don't have to worry about, you know, what current animation is playing, has the frame finished playing. You can adjust all of those settings visually using the animation controller. The other good thing about this is once these are set up, you're able to simply apply this animation controller to any other character and simply replace the animations with the animations for that character. In doing that, you're able to keep and maintain the logic between multiple characters. So for instance, you could set this up for an NPC that doesn't take input X and input Y, but takes destination X and destination Y as its parameters for your artificially intelligent navigation APIs or whatever you're doing for that. and then allow NPCs to share common functionality, such as, let's say they have emotes where they emote a little icon above their head. You can use the inbuilt animator of Unity to do that and share that functionality between all of your NPCs, so you wouldn't have to rewrite that code multiple times. Anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed this tutorial. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to leave a like on this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And yeah, leave any comments, questions, feedback, or suggestions in the comment section below, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye for now. Thank you for watching.